75% of business owners that sell their business, quote, profoundly regret selling their business within a year. ESOP did a study. The National Center for Employee Ownership found 93% of owners that sold to an ESOP are either very satisfied or satisfied with that decision.
What's going on, everybody? It's John Stamper, and thanks for coming back and tuning in to another episode of the Perfect Plan podcast with Matt Schiff. Matt, it is so excited to be back with you, and I've got to say, each one of these that we do, you continue to bring on awesome guests. When we think about the audience that you're educating, we're thinking about the business owner, the decisions they have to make. And on previous episodes, everybody, a lot of the focus and the guest that Matt brought on was on the planning side. Today's going to be the same, but we're going to also look a little bit down the road when we think about your business. What about that day? Are you going to sell? What is that going to look like? So in order to tee that up, we are very excited, as you can see, to have Dan, the ESOP man, with us. I know it's somebody that Matt has worked with over the years. So Matt, it's good to see you. Dan, thanks for coming on. Today's going to be a good one. We got all kinds of great insights to share on the Perfect Plan podcast. How you doing, Matt? How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for the opening. I mean, it's wonderful to have Dan on board here today. He is now our fifth guest. We've had or sixth guest. We've had Joe Jordan, Jane Schiff, Bud Schiff, Tom Hegna, and then just lastly we had Jamie Hopkins. And Hopkins was really on the individual side. He talked to you about financial planning, but one of the things is he was talking to you about your assets and where do you put your assets. And as a business owner, Dan, people don't know the background behind Dan, and I'm going to get it. I almost jumped into it because I'm so excited about what we can do here. But Dan and I have known each other, oh my God, probably since before my son was born. He was with MetLife at a time in the SBR, helping with the executive benefit side. But prior to that, he reminded me that he was a General American, and we met even earlier than that. Dan, it's so great to have you on board. What have you been doing now that you transitioned so long ago from MetLife, and now that you're over at BTA? Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm humbled to be in that group of folks that you've had on your podcast. That's insane. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I've been in this business, Matt. We've known each other 20 plus years. I've been in the ESOP business 25 years, started with General American, which was a small little insurance company that MetLife swallowed up. We started an ESOP program in 1999, and just interestingly enough, with Tom Brady, the football player's dad, Tom Sr., had an idea, and he said, hey, ESOPs might be a real neat thing that we could help my clients sell their business and monetize their biggest asset. And we just ran with it. And so one form or another through MetLife and now with my current firm, BTA, which is the same folks that MetLife teamed up with to help clients with ESOPs. I just happened to work for them for the last 14, 15 years. So I'm just thrilled. I love working in the ESOP marketplace. It's an extremely rewarding field to be in, just because of the wonderful things we're doing for business owners, the community, the employees of the company. It's life-changing for the employees of the company. And it's just a thrill and a pleasure to be a part of that.
Dan, when you say it's life-changing, I mean, a business owner says, well, wait a second, ESOP, it's more like, what is it? What's the acronym really mean? Because I've heard it said multiple different ways. Some people say it wrong. Some people say it yes. So tell us what ESOP stands for.
Yes, it stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan, not stock option plan. Completely different things. ESOP means something, an Employee Stock Ownership Plan means something in the Internal Revenue Code. It's a true blue, real life retirement plan, just like a 401k.
Wait a second. Whoa. Just stop right there. It's a retirement plan? You mean that I get a deduction as an employer to put money in this plan?
That's right.
And I have to give it to everybody, but I'm the owner. I don't want to do that.
Well, many owners do want to eventually monetize or have a liquidity event, Matt. They would like to say, hey, at some point, I'd like to hand the keys over to my children, key management, to somebody else because I want to enjoy a nice retirement. How do I do that? How do I monetize my business? And ESOP is a way that the government put in, frankly, in current form around 1974 with the passage of ERISA, which is the governing body of law that drives retirement plans. They were trying to solve the ill effects of some methods of selling a business. Sometimes, and many times, unfortunately, when business owners sell their business, the business gets destroyed. People get laid off. They close the shop. They take the patent to move the production to China, or say, yes, you have jobs, but you're moving across the country. ESOPs were designed as a way that a business owner can sell some or all of the stock of their company or their interest to their retirement plan. And the employees are eventually given the company over a period of years. And then they have a nice, healthy, hopefully very significant retirement. Because the average employee at an ESOP company has 2.5 times the average retirement plan balance than the equivalent or same employee at an equivalent or same company that doesn't have an ESOP. 2.5 times the retirement plan balance on average than their peer at a company without an ESOP. Pretty dramatic. That's life changing, man. That's life changing.
Those are interesting numbers because as an owner of my own business, I want to find a way to attract, retain, and reward all of those that are important, but also if I can reduce my turnover in the rank and file, then I don't have the training costs. I don't have my staff training them again and again. Now, tell me a little bit more about the ESOP. Again, if I'm a business owner, I may be 61. I may live in California. I might have 100 employees or so. And, at this time, because of certain economic conditions, I believe my business might be reduced value in comparison to what I could probably get it in a real market. What would I do with something like that? I mean, I'm right now 57. So what would I tell my peers? I don't want to sell the business. I want to work until I'm 70, but I'm 100% S Corp in California. And from a planning idea, I'm like, man, I'm in the highest tax bracket in the country, and they just added another tax to me.
Yes, I know. And the taxes are kind of one of the drivers of ESOPs. Now, the aspect of having a liquidity event, not having outside influences come in and tell you how to run your business without firing your employees and wanting to maintain your family and personal legacy of this business you and or your family built. I mean, that's important enough. I mean, that's an important enough reason for an ESOP. However, because the government really likes ESOPs and they like what it does for the economy, they give tremendous tax advantages, Matt. In fact, one of the big tax advantages to a business owner, that whether the business value is slightly down or not, we'll have to weigh that. Is this the right time to sell to anybody? But even if it is down slightly and the owner really does want a liquidity event, one of the big tax advantages of an ESOP is that if we structure it a certain way and the owner sells their business to the ESOP, they can potentially eliminate the capital gains tax that's normally due in a sale of a business. Pretty dramatic. It's like a real estate exchange called 1031. If any listener is aware of that, you had an old piece of land, you sell it and buy a new piece of land. That's a 1031 exchange. Your basis of your old property becomes the basis of your new property, and you don't pay tax now. It's still delayed and still deferred. ESOP has the same provision, 1042, if you're interested. It just says if you sell your business to an ESOP, you potentially don't have to pay capital gains tax on the sale proceeds, which is amazing. There's another big tax advantage of an ESOP. And by the way, when you don't pay capital gains tax, that makes up for maybe a slight dip in value. Or you wait till the value comes back up and you get the same tax advantage anyway. It just depends on the owner's goals and objectives and of what their timing looks like, what they want to have happen in their business. The second big tax advantage, since we're talking about taxes, is if a business is 100% ESOP owned. So if the business 100% ESOP owned and the company becomes an S Corp, it's a flow-through entity. At that point, the profits cease to be taxable. So Matt, in your example, California, which has very high income tax rates personally, and for a flow through business in a high tax state or any state, it's a real advantage to have the profits not taxed. I mean, let me say that again. Literally, the profits become non-taxable. Now, certain states might have a gross revenue tax, something of that sort. But filing an income tax return, the profits of an ESOP owned company, that's 100%, they are not paying income tax on profits ever again. That's the money that's used to pay off the debt we incurred to buy up to 100% of the stock of the company in the first place. So literally, money that used to go out the door one way or another to a taxing body now stays to the company and is redirected to pay the debt that was incurred, probably by a bank, to buy the stock from the selling shareholder. Pretty
So
dramatic.
Dan, if I'm catching you correctly, and I'm going to talk about left side, right side of my ledger, just looking at it. My left side is going to hold the tax side. My right side, I'm going to call the asset side. If I was putting out and I had $1 in income, I'm going to pay taxes of 40 cents over here, no matter what, in California. But you're saying over here, my debt service could be what in comparison? 6, 8, 10, 12% as a carrying cost?
Well, actually, Matt, the leverage is normal banking. So
Okay.
the company would take a normal commercial loan at commercial loan rates.
Okay.
And that's the money that would be used to pay the seller. So it's not an exorbitant rate at all. Just my point was the
And it's
company's not.
dramatically less than the tax rate. So there's
Yeah,
a
so
spread between the two.
the tax savings in almost every scenario in all states, the tax savings of having the profits not taxed in almost every scenario that I've ever seen, I've been doing this 25 years, the tax savings during the financing period is greater than the sale price of the business, even at its peak. So literally the tax savings is more than the sale price of the company over the financing period. So literally just what would have been tax dollars is what's paying off the debt we incurred to buy even 100% at peak value.
That's important because most of the business owners I talk to are like, where am I going to come up with the cash to pay for this?
That's
And
right.
then once it's done, I mean, are we limited? Is there any issue like in a C corp? If I needed to keep a key employee around, am I limited from doing an executive bonus plan or a deferred comp, or even providing, an employer provided life and long term care hybrid in California, which gets rid of all the long term care new tax that they've got coming in Washington? So
No, ESOP encourages that because the ESOP, there's a trustee. We could get into that if you'd like, but there's a trustee that oversees the ESOPs. An absentee owner just wants to verify that the company's not doing anything illegal and they're treating the employees well. But the seller to an ESOP still remains in charge. They control the board of directors, make the decisions, and indefinitely until they want to pass the reins to their children, key management, grandchildren, whoever they want, or they could just stay there forever if they want to. They've had a liquidity event and they have a place to go hang their hat if they want to. But with that being said, the government actually encourages things such as what you just said, Matt. You got to continue to run the business. You've got to retain, recruit key people, and you still got to run your business the proper way, the way that got you to where you are to that sale. The ESOP wants a healthy business that grows value. So when the employees who are getting shares of this company indirectly, that not actually owning shares, but getting shares over 20, 30, 40 years, when they retire, they cash out a nice, healthy retirement balance. That's the whole point of an ESOP. So the things you're talking about are vital to protect the company, to grow and maintain and be a successful company long term, which in turn benefits the employees.
but for me to be able to get the benefit of the shares as an employee, if I remember correctly, you have to separate from service to get the value, correct?
Correct. Yes, the employees are given shares over a long period of time, maybe 20, 30, 40 years, maybe 50 years in some cases. So it's an encouragement to stick around. Come work for us. We're handing out stock for a long period of time. grow the value of the company because you're growing your retirement plan. Grow every year you get more shares. So by the time you leave employment, hopefully after a nice long retirement, but unfortunately, sometimes other things happen. People die, people become disabled. Unfortunately, people quit or get fired. And there's something called diversification that once you've been in the plan for so long, you have to have an option to take your eggs out of the company stock basket. But there are 5 triggers. Now, that doesn't mean we treat everybody equally. As far as they do have a vested balance, there's a vesting schedule, just like a normal 401k. And we treat people, the payout rather, we treat people fairly. But the payout might be different depending on the reason they leave. Somebody dies or becomes disabled, their family probably really needs the money. You usually pay them in a lump sum the year after the event happened. Somebody retires, you usually pay them in 5 installments to help their taxation. They get an income stream for a couple of years. But if somebody quits or gets fired, we can make them wait perhaps up to 6 years and then pay them in 5 installments. We don't want to encourage somebody to quit to start a competing business or just to buy a motorcycle or a pickup truck.
But that has to be across the board. That has to be everybody. Right. And it has to be on a proportional income basis. Is that correct?
That's how shares are proportioned for the most part. One's compensation relative to total payroll. So if we're handing out shares for 30 years, that means 1/30th of the stock that the ESOP bought day one from the seller, 1/30th a year for 30 years is being handed out to the employees. That's subdivided. That 1/30th is subdivided exactly as you said, Matt. So if Sue makes 1% of payroll, Sue's going to get 1% of the 1/30th that's being handed out that year. I know I'm mixing fractions.
No. You're showing how you would allocate it based upon salary and their value to the company, which leads me to the next, right. Which leads me to the next question. You said I could sell 50% of my business, or I could sell 100% of my business, and I could still run the company.
Absolutely.
Now, as running the company, can I build in future value? I like to do what they call a phantom stock plan for all of my key employees. But, as a banker, I would say, if I could keep the business owner around in a way to incentivize and also give him some future value for his work, is there a way to do that, and how would it be deemed?
In fact, it's funny. I didn't know where you were going with the question. I was going to interrupt you to say just what you just said. We think alike. We've known each other a long time, Matt. Yes, in almost every ESOP we do, even though the higher paid are getting more shares, it's still somewhat limited, and you are splitting it with all of the employees. Now, somebody makes 100,000 gets twice the shares that somebody makes $50,000 a year. But that being said, there are that key top group of people that we need to do something extra for. So with almost every ESOP, Matt, we do exactly what you said. Even you do a lot of them with us, which is the deferred compensation, phantom stock appreciation rights. I like the phantom stock and the stock appreciation rights in the ESOP context because we're already having the stock valued every year as it is. So it's not an extra cost in the ESOP scenario because you're already getting the stock valued every year. And by the way, the employees get a statement every year. Here's how many shares I had. Here's how many new shares I've got. Here's how many shares I picked up from the dumb people that left and they're forfeiting their shares, and that gets redistributed to the people that are there. Here's my vested percentage and here's my value. So the employees get to see that on a yearly basis, and they can see the value rising.
Wait a second. You're saying just like my 401k profit sharing, where somebody in their first 6 years of vesting, they left before they were fully vested. That money, as even a rank and file employee, I get some of that money, that profit?
Yep. If those schmucks leave,
because I'm an owner, right? I'm an owner.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Well, with that being said, Matthew, I do want to be kind of clear. It's called employee stock ownership plan, but shocker, the government lied. The employees don't technically own a share of stock. They only have a beneficial interest in the trust that owns stock on their behalf. And the reason I say that is for our business owners that may be listening, that's a very important distinction because they don't have voting rights. They can't come in and vote for whether we're going to hire this new manager or buy that new equipment or that new building. They can't call shareholder meetings, and they don't have rights to confidential information, such as the salary package of anybody. And so they have a beneficial interest in this trust that's for their benefit, and they enjoy the financial value of the stock value in the trust that they have, but they don't actually technically have legal right and legal ownership of that stock. And that's a very important distinction. So, which says that, in other words, you sell more than 51%, you're not losing control of the company because the employees aren't voting those shares. The seller still controls the board. There is a trustee, technically owns the stock, has no desire to run the company whatsoever. It says, hey, I'm going to dance with who brung me, and I'm just let the board continue to be the board. Pass the reins to who you want to pass it to. Stick around for as long as you want to stick around, and take customers out to dinner every or lunch on Fridays after you golf and after you use your company paid cell phone and your company paid health care. And it's a nice place to hang your hat until you don't want to anymore. And no outside buyer looking over your shoulder telling you what to do.
It's awesome. What can you explain to me how warrants, you were trying to tell me how we could put warrants in there. What are the effects of it to the shareholders that are there? What is the effects to the owner who sold the company, and how can you best use them?
Yes. We kind of get hung up in the technical term warrants. And so I'm going to say where they fit, and then just know that they are in the form of warrants. There are some sausage making behind the scenes, but here's where they come into play. When a business owner sells 100%, and most business owners do sell 100% to the ESOP because they want to be tax-free. And when you're 100% ESOP owned, you aren't paying taxes. And we have all this extra cash flow now that we didn't have before that used to go to the governments is now is available to pay debt. So most go 100% from the get-go. But with that being said, there's not hardly any, I won't say never, but banks won't lend 100% of the value of the company. They're going to lend 1.5, 2.5, maybe 3 times EBITDA. And that maybe equates, just on average, 35 to 50% of the value of the company. So there's a shortfall. So the bank will lend maybe up to half. That's aggressive, but maybe up to half. And then what we say to the sellers is, look, we could go out and find some. You're going to say something, Matt. What is it?
I was going to say seller note.
Well, that's what we do.
That's what originally went into my head.
That's exactly what it is. Instead of going out and finding some crazy mezzanine firm that's willing to sit subordinate to the bank and charge 14%, which sounds nice, but it's all taxable and it doesn't work in the ESOP context. We say exactly what you said, Matt. We say to the seller, take some seller installment notes over a period of years based on whatever your tax-free cash flow allows, no prepayment penalty, but take seller notes for the balance, the other half, the other 60%, over a period of 6-8 years, something like that, if you're willing to stick it out. That's one thing about an ESOP. You're not getting all your money up front usually. So if a seller wants all of their money up front, that's a scenario where an ESOP may not make sense. However, I have found in my 25 years, owners aren't looking to just cut and run. That's their baby. They built this thing from scratch, or it's been in the family for 5 years. And they want to, 50 years or 5 generations. They want to stick around. They're not looking to run out the door. So they generally don't mind taking a payment stream over a period of years, 6-8 years. But here's where that warrants, or I just like to say future equity payment, comes into play. Because the seller didn't get all their money up front, and they maybe could have from another outside buyer, then they bore interest-only subordinate debt to the bank. Now, I'd argue there's no real extra risk here, right? If you did nothing and held your own equity, or you sold to the ESOP, you're tax-free, and you owe yourself money because you're still running the company, you're chair of the board, president, and CEO, you owe yourself money. Really, from a risk standpoint, how different is it really? But from a technical standpoint and a lending standpoint, you're a subordinate lender. You are like that mezzanine lender who would charge 13%. So we say to the seller, match the bank, make everybody happy, lower your taxes, importantly, because you're getting taxed on that interest. But when you're 100% paid from the negotiated sale price, you got half up front, or 35 of the half up front, the other 65, 50% over a period of years. When that's all said and done, the sellers get another check equal to, it's almost always 20% of whatever the then value of the company is, the day all that debt's paid off. Mm-hmm. So if we have a company worth $100 million and they don't grow at all they do is pay back their debt, the sellers get another check for $20 million. But that's not what happens, right? a company worth $100 million is growing. It's going to be 150 million, 200 million by the time the debt's paid off. So now they're getting a check for 30 to 40 million additional above and beyond the sale price, many times in the end of 6 years, 7, 8 years. And that's taxable as capital gains, not ordinary income, as just taking a high interest rate would have been. So that's technically in the form of warrants, Matt, but when it boils down to it, it's just a payment.
Okay, so if I've heard you correctly, this is what I'm hearing. I can sell my business today.
Yes.
For a fixed dollar amount.
Yes.
Reduce my taxes, retain my key employees, and in the future, get I would say, the growth of the company, as well as hand this off in the manner that I want and still control the business all at the same time?
Yeah, with one technical difference here. They're not getting the 20% of the growth of the company. They're getting 20% of the total value of the company, not the growth. Yes.
So
and people listening are probably saying it's too good to be true. And you know what? When I do my long form presentations, when I do continuing education for attorneys and accountants and trusted advisors, I literally spend probably 10 minutes talking about why the government likes ESOPs, because the average of 2.5 times the retirement plan balance, return on investment, ESOP companies pay higher wages, and less people, 4 times less likely to be laid off during tough economic times, less people in government safety nets. So the actual economic value to the governments after about a 6-year period is greater than the tax they're giving up by not collecting tax on profits. And so in my presentations, I have people think it's funny. I have a picture of Bernie Sanders and a picture of Ronald Reagan, both talking about how much they love ESOPs. And it's still true to this day. Both the left and the right side of the aisle both love ESOPs. They kind of come at it from different reasons, and we'll let people think about that themselves from what angle different people come from. But both parties like ESOPs. In fact, they're totally not thinking about getting rid of any of these tax benefits. In fact, they're always looking for ways to increase the tax benefits. In fact, there was an awareness bill. ESOPs were mentioned in actually funded for every state to get money, part of the Work Act, which is part of the Secure 2.0, giving money to every state to start an ESOP initiative in every single state.
It would be better. It would be better than the government provided pensions that are listed in the Pew reports, where there's billions of dollars in our largest states of unfunded obligations that are going to be paid by future taxpayers, not today. Hey, John. Hey, John.
Yeah.
You've been quiet on this as a business owner, and knowing as many business owners as you do have. What questions do you have for Dan that I haven't asked that I think that our listeners would like to hear?
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways from this great insight is, whether I think about it, Matt, or others that I speak with, so often there's not that focus on the end in mind, right? There's this assumption, and we've talked about this in other episodes, that, you're a busy business owner and it's the old, I'll get to that, right? Oh yeah, I'll get to that. And yet hearing this, I think what the biggest takeaway is in this episode is that making the decision, this is a great example of planning with the end in mind and knowing what your options are so that you can put things in place ahead of time. And so like it's been with all the other episodes, Dan, Matt's really been trying to, let's just call it like it is, create some trigger effects for the business owners that are waiting to kind of make these decisions in hopes of moving them forward to do these necessary things. And I think that's what's been so valuable at the insight that you've shared, is that this is an important thing. And so often many, many, many don't know about. So I think that's kind of my biggest takeaway, Matt, for business owners, is this is just another example to focus on the end in mind and then the details around how to do it.
Hey, Dan, what success stories over the last 20 years have you had? Like, I just saw that you had Gutman Energy. Is that the right name that I'm getting? And they're just one of them. And they're just one of the many companies that you've helped. But tell the story behind why or how these things have come about. and why the business owner or the families have been so happy doing this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. I have to be a little careful from confidentiality standpoint, but yes, Gutman MG or Gutman Holdings now, we incorporated several of their entities into the ESOP, and it's public knowledge they generally do about 4 billion of revenue a year. It's I believe fifth generation business, and it just came to a point like a lot of family businesses that I see. In fact, just a little sidebar, most of the ESOPs we do were family businesses, multi-generational family businesses, and people just assume that it'll always stay in the family. But I would not assume that. It comes to a point like Gutman family, who are wonderful, wonderful human beings. They just got to a point where the generation said, I want to do something different with my life, or I'm going to manage a different part of our family business, not the actual energy side of things. And so hired I think personally the best CEO and the best top COO that we could possibly find to run the business. But yet the original family could sell this company with 4 billion of revenue, and the profits of this company, 4 billion of revenue, aren't paying taxes anymore to the state of Pennsylvania, which is where they're domiciled, or to the federal government.
Josh Shapiro was not happy about that one.
He will be in 5 years when the crossover comes in and they find that the economic activity generated from the higher wages and people aren't being laid off and every good things that happen with ESOPs. If he's still governor in 5 years, he's going to be very happy about it, because the net proceeds into the federal and state government will be greater. I know you were kidding, but I want to get that plug in anyway.
well, wait a second. We're not going to talk about Josh's politics in any way, shape, or form.
No way.
The first time I met him, he was a legislative director, and I've known him all the way along the way with his wife and his kids and their family friends. So I think he has some aspirations that I'm not going to get into.
Yeah.
But that's a great story about how one family has done this. Without going into names, where are some other situations where, I'm not a $4 billion company. I may have 100 employees. I make 15 million, 25 million. Right. That's what the valuation was in the last 3 to 5 years, even COVID. Right. Tell me, why does it make sense, and what type of industry? Because if I'm in a services business, do I really get that? It's goodwill more. That's the issue. I mean, so tell me what business is really
blue collar type businesses. Manufacturing is usually the top. Construction, transportation, distribution, warehousing, things of the like. The exception to the kind of the general rule I just said is the technical services. It's financial firms, it's engineering and architectural firms. Huge. They love ESOPs. It's partly a competitive thing because their peers have it, and they're trying to hire people and have them not go to their peers that have an ESOP, where they're giving out ownership, beneficial ownership. So we see a lot of it in those type firms, but it's mostly those. We generally need a company worth 10 million or more of value, Matt. People like to know this, so you didn't ask it, but I was throwing it out there anyway, kind of in the theme of who does ESOP. You generally need a firm with 2 million of EBITDA or 2 million of net earnings plus some adjustments. You add back amortization and depreciation, maybe add back some excess owner salary, maybe add back some salary of some family members that aren't really working in the business, and we know how that works. That's fine.
So you're saying it was $1.2 million, $1.4 million, but there's about $600,000 worth of expenses
correct.
That are non-line items. I got it.
Yeah, and that's part of the planning too, as John said, that as we're planning on growing planning on just growing a business, you should always have that end point in mind. I highly recommend, if you're going to sell a business in the next 10 years, just clean everything up. Yeah, we all know what happens. We know how businesses run, but having documents in a certain folder on a computer somewhere, having your balance sheet and your income statement cleaned up, so you're not, when you go to sell and you're trying to explain why your sister-in-law, why you should add back the $200,000 you've been paying her that doesn't work in the business. The seller doesn't trust you as much because they think you're doing some stuff. and B, it's tougher to explain and add backs. You might have to get additional proof. It just doesn't, it's not a good look. So having things cleaned up and neat and tidy from the get-go, and I'm a true believer, you should always be ready to sell. You never know when an unsolicited offer is going to be phenomenal, whether you do an ESOP or not an ESOP. So just having it in ready shape, and my attorney friend Jim Carlisle calls it the ripcord. So you're because you're at any given time you pull the cord if you get a good deal, and it's time to roll. And if you have to all of a sudden scramble to find your stock certificates and all the information that's going to be needed, you're real down.
Hey, here you go.
Yep,
exactly. Here are the keys.
There's another aspect that I would like to talk about. You talk about scenarios to do ESOPs. You talked about the family business like Gutman and many of the other ones we do. Maybe the family's not there, maybe they are, but key management, right? And almost so many times, this is the other major, it's either family or maybe key management. So we're going to buy the business. We're a key management team. Great. That's fantastic. Well, first of all, they probably don't have that entrepreneurial spirit to begin with, or they would have owned their own business anyway. But beside the point, often the management say, we're going to come together, we're going to buy this business, and that's great. And the owner says, fantastic, go put together a package. They go back and they maybe talk to the SBA. They look at their 401k. They look at their kid's 529 college account. And they come back to the owner and say, I think we could put together this amount of money, but seller, you're going to have to finance it for us. We're going to have to pay you at 1% interest a year for the next 30 years. So because this is the only way we can afford to do this. Or they get on the path of talking to the SBA, and the SBA informs they're going to have to put a second mortgage on their house. They're going to have to risk all their personal assets, dig into their 401k, like I said, dig into their college fund for their kids, and say to their spouse, hey, honey, great, I got a great idea. I'm thinking about buying Bill and Mary's cement business over here, and all we have to do is second mortgage the house and drain all of our funds. And I really think me, Bob, and Tim over here, and Sally and Sue, I think we can make this work. What do you think, honey? Next thing you know, they're going back to the owner and saying, I can't do it, because it's too much of a risk. And that goes back to the entrepreneurial spirit in the first place. Because that's, so we say it as an option, and this is many, many, many of my cases. We start there, they go through the process, and in less than a year later, they come back and say, and we present to the management, look, how about this? How about we let basically the government pay me for my stock? We're not going to go 100% ESOP, not pay tax, let the tax dollars pay me for my shares. I'm not being banked to you, I'm being banked to myself. I get a future equity kick on the back end. You, management, you're going to be, once I'm paid out, you're going to be president, chair, CEO. You're going to get the bigger salary than anybody else. You're going to have bigger ESOP balances than anybody else because it's paid. ESOP shares are handed out proportionate to compensation relative to payroll over a long period of time. You're going to have the biggest, plus we're going to do a stock appreciation rights or a phantom stock program, which is just synthetic equity, where we're just saying you don't have actual stock. We're tracking as if you did have actual stock. That's all we're doing with phantom stock and stock appreciation rights. So we're just saying we're tracking as if you own 2,000 shares, for example. So you're going to have that on top of your ESOP shares, your salary, your bonus, your clubs, your perks, your position. And by the way, you don't have to pay a nickel for all that. So you can go second mortgage your house, fight with your spouse, drain your funds, college tuition funds, or you can let the government pay me for my stock. We'll load you up with synthetic stock. We'll get more ESOP shares than anybody. You'll have all the titles. You'll have all the perks. And I'll be out of your hair once I'm paid. You don't have to pay a nickel for that. What do you want to do?
I'll take the second.
Yeah, exactly. It always comes down to option B.
Lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
And FYI, what you just went through is a very complex process. You need to be a little more sophisticated to really understand it, because I'm going to tell you, if you're listening to this podcast and you wanted to understand how to really understand how the ESOP is built with all the bells and whistles, Dan just gave you a perfect example of that, because he went from 1 to 100 in about 2 seconds. I totally followed, but I'm not sure most of our listeners did, Dan.
Sorry, everybody.
That's
Oh,
okay. I
I love
totally got
that.
it, but I needed to put a caveat on it
Well,
because
I
if
appreciate
anybody
that,
is
Matt.
listening, um, Dan is one of the smartest people out there, really, really creative. And as you can see, based upon your company's structure, your history, and your goals, Dan can be a great asset in helping you monetize your business when you want to monetize it in a way that's attractive to all. I think that that's what you just exemplified right there.
And I'd say, even, sorry about the complexity there, but just to say to business owners listening that, it's the satisfaction. There's a stat that's put out. PwC put out a study, and it said that 75% of business owners that sell their business, quote, profoundly regret selling their business within a year. ESOP did a study. The National Center for Employee Ownership found 93% of owners that sold to an ESOP are either very satisfied or satisfied with that decision, with only 7% neutral or dissatisfied. And I think a lot of that comes from the feeling of the life, what you did for those employees, those life-changing event for employees that keep their jobs, have 2.5 times the retirement plan benefit, less likely to be laid off, higher wages, and what the seller did for their family and their family's legacy. Do you want to, I had a client one time that, a non-client that looked at an ESOP, sold because they thought they sold it to the private equity firm that the guy at the club told them about. Shows up, a week after the sale, shows up at church in this little small town. It was a 50, 75 person tool and die shop in a small town. It's a big employer in that town. It means a lot to that town, that employer. Well, this guy shows up in his brand new Cadillac from the money he got from the sale proceeds, goes to church on Sunday morning and finds out in church, in the pew, that the firm laid off 75% of the workforce. So he's sitting in that church pew with his brand new Cadillac he drove up in, sitting next to all the people that were laid off. This guy was sick to his stomach, took that Cadillac back and thought about moving because he was so upset, because even if I got a couple bucks more, it wouldn't have been worth it. He wouldn't have, by the way. He didn't get more than we got in ESOP, just for the record. But perception and being a hot shot, selling to a certain firm, backfired. And those are part of that 75% that profoundly regret. There's a family and personal and community legacy that you're building and preserving. Grandpa's picture still in the foyer. That stuff matters. And when you're in a smaller town and you're an employer of 50 people, that's a big deal, because those are 50 people laid off now that if you don't, if they get laid off by the new buyer, that, aren't going to the bank, not getting a loan for the car, aren't buying a new house, aren't buying a car at that car dealership, aren't going out to eat. That devastates that community. And that story about the Cadillac just it hits my heart.
There's another flip side to that, is in that small town, you usually do not have a ready and willing buyer who has the funds to come in at a specific time. Now, you can actually set it up if you are a 50% owned ESOP, that it would trigger the other half upon the death, disability, et cetera, events that Dan can build in. And you immediately know that the 50 to 70 people that are in the town are now still going to have jobs. Your family's going to be taken care of. And you didn't have to worry about, I don't have a valuation right now. You have a ready, willing buyer with a set dollar amount when you want it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, I wanted to just two things as we wrap. Something that you just said. First of all, I was going to ask you some statistics, and you shared, and I'm so glad that you shared that 75 and that 93, whatever that was, because as I was hearing you speak, I was thinking a little bit about kind of how the business world has progressed even since COVID. Now, I can't say this isn't a fact, but I think your statistics, really, send a strong message. I feel like in COVID, there were a lot of business owners that when they were able to find a way to either minimize layoffs or pull their companies through, were very proud. And you heard a lot of businesses say that. And I think what's so important about what you have just shared, and we've talked about this exit in mind, I see this other element to this, and that is these business owners thinking about, the exit in mind in their retirement, right? I mean, something that you've been talking about, Matt, is that, there's two elements to this. There's planning to make sure that you have the exit in mind with your business. There's also, how are you going to feel? What's it going to be like in that retirement? Like you said, Matt, when you're in that community where you sold that business, there's all those individuals. And so that's just maybe something that doesn't get spoke a lot about this program, and the planning that you're talking about is what those business owners have to live with. And I think it's just another reason for everybody watching this to take a little extra time to be able to do this planning. I mean, I know that you mentioned that it was very complex, Dan, but I will just say, like, as somebody that was listening, this will be split up into little clips for people to watch over the next month. There's so many great insights into this. And so my hope is, and I know it certainly is Matt's, that, even just one business owner takes, what you shared and executes and gets those documents together. So great stuff.
Well, thanks for having me.
I want to thank you for coming on. This was a wealth of knowledge from top to bottom, not to mention the story, from how we've known each other, but truly from a business owner standpoint, the stuff that I've been trying to explain to my friends who are business owners, these are the chances. This is your opportunity time to monetize and do it right. And how do you want to do it? So I want to thank you again.
Well, I'm absolutely humbled to be here. With the guests you've had previously, I can't believe it. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it a ton.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Dan. Until next time. See you later, everybody.